I grew up thinking about archaeology and space adventures. I think it is important then to think about how we can learn from archaeology about what humans are capable of imagining and building. And two of my favorite archaeological objects are the Antikythera mechanism and the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Antikythera mechanism is humanity's oldest known computer. It was built 2,000 years ago and found off the Greek island of Antikythera by divers in 1901. And it took us decades to even figure out what it was. It is a complicated geared mechanism, and you would input a date by turning a dial on the side, and then it would output movements of the known planets and the moon using a complicated set of gears. This is an analog computer. It was a marvel of engineering, and even more than that, it showed a worldview of its builders living among Greek islands. This was a worldview that said the universe is mathematically structured, and that structure, even more excitingly, is knowable. What an extraordinary way to think 2,000 years ago. The Epic of Gilgamesh is humanity's oldest known work of literature. It is older than the Iliad and the Odyssey by 1,000 years. When it was discovered in what is now Iraq, it created a stir because it also includes a version of the flood story, even though it also predates the book of Genesis by about 1,000 years. It tells the story of the king of Uruk who goes off on adventures in search of eternal life, and he comes back without eternal life, but wiser and a better member of his community, a better leader for his people. And what's remarkable is we are a social species that has individual consciousness, and for as long as we can remember, we've been telling versions of this kind of hero's journey. It's a recurring pattern in our cultures across time. So today, both of these are still relevant to how we think about growing and flourishing in outer space. On the left, you see our computing mechanisms have gotten more complicated, but they continue to help us to organize and deepen our knowledge of the universe. And we continue to go on hero's journeys. We continue to venture out and learn things and come back. And I would argue that the most compelling hero's journey is actually Apollo 8. Apollo 8 was before Apollo 11. It is not as famous as it should be, but it was humanity's first expedition to the moon. We proved out all of the technologies we would need to go to the moon and for the Apollo 11 landing. It was the first time that humans ever voyaged beyond just Earth orbit all the way to the moon. We only decided in the final months of planning to even send it to the moon. The mission was so risky that we sent them on a free return trajectory. So if something went wrong while the astronauts were on their way to the moon, they would slingshot gravitationally around the moon and come back to Earth. When they did go around the moon and they went over the lunar far side, they became the first humans ever to look with their own eyes at the far side of the moon. The far side of the moon is more mountainous than the side of the moon that we see from the Earth. They had this experience of seeing the far side while also being completely cut off from the rest of humanity. Today we have communication satellites everywhere and relaying communications. But back then, there was none of that. They had no way to talk to the rest of humanity while they were coasting over the far side of the moon. And of course, they took the famous Earthrise picture, one of the most widely reproduced images that humanity has ever created. Hopefully you know that this image helped motivate environmental movements here on Earth, but there's an additional part of this picture which is less often discussed and a little bit abstract, but still worth talking about. It is that this gave us an opportunity to imagine seeing humanity and Earth from the eyes of outsiders. If we were to imagine intelligent visitors from somewhere else in the galaxy coming to Earth, coming to our solar system, coming to talk to humanity, and as they were arriving at Earth, we could imagine that they might see a vista like this. And we could imagine looking through their eyes and seeing humanity through the eyes of outsiders. And that's important because one of the great opportunities of spaceflight, especially of human spaceflight, is to hold up a mirror to humanity and to human civilization, and to imagine how we might want to improve ourselves and how we might want to advance ourselves. And so Apollo 8 accomplished one of the highest aims of human spaceflight, which was a new view of humanity, a new view of the cosmos. Step forward a couple of generations, and I would say that the next age of exploration and expansion and growth into space actually began quietly, very quietly, in 2010, with two little-known NASA spacecraft that demonstrated a new way of moving around the moon. Confusingly, the spacecraft are also named Artemis, the same as NASA's now major human spaceflight initiative. So these are little-known spacecraft, but they went into what are called halo orbits around the Lagrange points on either side of the moon. We had known that this was possible in math and in theory for a very long time, but we had not yet demonstrated it simply and practically right here in the Earth-Moon system. And so one spacecraft went into orbit, a halo orbit, around the L1 point on the near-Earth side of the moon. The other went into a halo orbit around the L2 point on the far side of the moon. And then, especially excitingly, the one orbiting around the L2 point on the far side did the smallest maneuver, the smallest bit of thrust, and moved all the way around the moon to the L1 point on the near-Earth side of the moon, and demonstrated, a bit like sailing, that you could move, if you're willing to wait, you could move with just the smallest pushes, the smallest effort, great distances. If we look at this trajectory from the side, we see these kind of not just simple circular orbits, but these kind of beautiful three-dimensional orbits, three-dimensional shapes, and this ability to move great distances. And this is possible because these are technically three-body problem orbits. These are spacecraft not moving just in orbit around the Earth or just in orbit around the moon, but moving subject to the gravity of both the Earth and the moon, which gives a kind of surface that you can sail on and move with great ease over very long distances. If we put those ideas together and zoom out a bit, we get a new sense of a kind of geography of the Earth-Moon system. So again, old ideas. Again, things we've been thinking about for a while, but that now we have the practical, technological capabilities to bring these to real use and to have practical benefit from this kind of geography of cislunar space, of the outer part of the Earth-Moon system. So what you're seeing here is, of course, the Earth has gravity, and when you leave Earth, you have to overcome that gravity. That takes energy. It's a bit like climbing out of a valley. And so we say that the Earth has this gravitational potential well, and the moon has less gravity, so it has a shallower well. It's easier to leave the moon and go out into space. And then something interesting happens when you're beyond a certain distance from Earth, when you're beyond what I'll call the Warden line. When you're beyond this distance, you can, about 100,000 kilometers, think of this as a parallel to the Kármán line at 100 kilometers. When you're beyond, let's say, the Warden line at 100,000 kilometers, you can begin to access these other orbits because you're high enough out of the gravity well. You're on your way to the moon, or perhaps you're already going around the moon. And then, when we put these ideas together, there is a neat practical benefit. If we were to make it easier to operate in this region of space, we could make it easier for much more of humanity to go to the moon itself. So to see this idea, and this is an important physical idea, to see this idea, think of the history of low Earth orbit. At the start of the space age, when you launched a satellite, you had to worry about finding your satellite after you launched it. You had to worry about passing over ground stations where you could downlink your data. You had to worry about keeping track of where your satellite was as it went around the Earth. And all of that is easier today. You can buy data downlink as a service. You can take advantage of the fact that the US government provides course tracking data of all things in space for flight safety reasons. You can put a GPS chip on your satellite in, know where it is at all times. These things have contributed to the flourishing in low Earth orbit over the last 10 or 15 years. None of that exists for the moon yet. Countries still lose spacecraft in orbit around the moon, which then have to be found. Getting data back from the moon is still extraordinarily difficult, especially if you don't have a deep space network. All of these things, if we could make them easier, if we could extend space tracking capabilities to the moon, if we could increase communication capabilities to get data, especially large amounts of data back from the moon, these could be things, these are problems that we could solve, and these could make it easier to go to the moon. When I was at the White House, and I am no longer at the White House, so now I have to say these are my personal views, but when I was there, I was starting to bring these into American national policy thinking. And these were the very first, very first movements to bring these into national policy thinking. And the idea is actually quite simple when you put these things together. It is that if we use our national exploration program, which is already going to the moon, to also incentivize the creation of new infrastructure and capabilities to solve these problems of operating in deeper space in the Earth-Moon system, we can open access to the moon to much more of humanity. And this can be much more of a whole society exploration endeavor to the moon. I think of this as open exploration. What kind of futures does that unlock? Well, Arthur C. Clarke would say that most of our history is still ahead of us, and maybe humanity's real history begins as we leave the Earth. Possible futures here have already been imagined. On the left, you have a print by Arthur C. Clarke and one of his artist friends titled Prospecting for Air on the Moon, and they created this in 1954, before the first spacecraft even launched to Earth orbit. They already imagined that we may someday be extracting chemicals from the lunar soil to help people breathe and to help people live at the moon. And on the right, you have visions from Princeton and California in the United States of enormous verdant city-sized space stations built, for example, at the L5 Lagrange point using materials brought up from the moon and from the lunar surface. As we think about human growth and flourishing in space, a scholar who is actually connected to the International Space University, named Ben Finney, proposed that thinking in terms of the European age of exploration is actually fairly limiting, and in multiple ways, we might now say. And a better model, he said, was thinking about ancient Polynesians growing and expanding across the Pacific Ocean, who, as they settled on new islands, adapted culturally and socially to being better at seafaring and better able to sail to even more distant islands precisely at enormous distances in the Pacific Ocean. And so as we expand and grow into space, as we build a new sphere of human activity around the moon, as we visit and go to Venus and Mars and Ceres, so too we will be starting grand expeditions to the outer solar system. The first visionary analyses of the first human expeditions to the Jupiter system have also already been done. We know that the first humans to visit the Jupiter system will probably round Jupiter and then visit Callisto, the outermost of the large Galilean moons. This will probably be an expedition that takes about 5 years, and it will be a grand expedition, which brings us back to the Epic of Gilgamesh. The opening line of the Epic of Gilgamesh is about one who saw into the deep. It turns out there's debate, though, about the last word in that sentence. It has variously been translated as the totality, the all things, the depths, and there is essentially only agreement that there's no one-word equivalent in English for this ancient Akkadian word. So it is usually more rendered more simply and poetically as just the deep. As we grow and expand and visit new places in the solar system, we will get new visions of what it means to be human as we travel with our increasingly intelligent computing machines. We will get new glimpses into the deep. And you are here at a critical juncture, right when the character of space activities is changing the most in generations. A critical time. So allow me to suggest, that this opportunity comes with some responsibility. Your work has the potential to increase the happiness, the inventiveness, the creativity of humanity and the knowledge of future generations. At some point in your lives, at some point in your career, please work toward these ends. Please remember to do good for humanity and envision and build positive futures for humanity. And along the way, enjoy the adventure. Thank you.